what do you think will turn out to be the most consequential story that you reported in 2023? And by that, I mean a story you wrote that is most likely to be cited in the annals of Church of Christ history in 10, 20, or 50 years. And we'll start with Eric.
Well, I think the coverage of the conflict in Israel, it was all about Ukraine last year, and that conflict has not gone anywhere. And we've still talked about the impact that Churches of Christ are having there, or the impact that the conflict is having on them, the way they're responding to it. Now we're seeing the exact same thing in Israel. So where does all of this end? I don't know. That's the real concerning thing for me, not just for us as a fellowship, but for us as a global society, is we do not see an end game to either one of those conflicts. So this is obviously bright, cheery stuff to start out with here, Brad. But I mean, that really is, I think, probably the most significant stories that I've been able to do in the last 12 months. So I don't know. Let's just keep going the same way. Audrey, what do you think?
Well, my answer isn't nearly as heavy hitting as what Eric's reported on this year, but I did a story back in January, and I think it printed in our February issue, about ministers in South Africa. And I think the headline was, if they go into full-time ministry, they'll go back to poverty. And I think that's something that someone could cite 10, 20 years down the line on how that has affected the continuation and the growth of congregations there, as well as Christians.
Who's next, Audrey?
Yeah, I'm going to throw it to Cheryl.
That's a little hard for me. I write a lot fewer stories. Someone's thinking yes, but they're so much longer than others on the staff. But a good friend of mine who's a church historian has told me, the things you write will be quoted down the road. And I think that's true of everything that the Chronicle does. So maybe not a particular story, but generally the coverage of the closing and moving and reconfiguring of the our Church of Christ Associated Universities theology schools and graduate programs. I'm not sure that people at this point understand the long-term impact of that, but I do believe that the long-term impact will be significant. And once it is realized, people will look back and say, wow, how in the world did that happen? So obviously the story about Harding's move, not closure, as they have been so thoughtful to point out on many occasions. But also, less than a year ago, the changes when Lipscomb closed its Austin campus and Oklahoma Christian closing its graduate program. There are a couple of graduate programs that are really doing well and growing, but the majority are not. And so I think there is indisputable long-term impact that's going to come from that. Oh.
Pass the ball, Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm just so used to being interrupted with this group. I'm going to pass it to Bobby.
Thanks, Cheryl. Brad made me mute, so I wasn't able to interrupt you, but I appreciate what you said. And a lot of the things Cheryl covers, she gets the hard stories because since I'm editor, I can pass the buck sometimes, and Cheryl does such a great job with those. I guess as far as what I've written personally, my hope would be that maybe, we've done several stories this year kind of on ethnic diversity in Churches of Christ, that maybe people down the line would look and say, wow, in 2023, the Chronicle was in Chicago reporting on a really diverse congregation there with people worshiping in 3 languages and kind of trying to make the flock kind of look more like the community that they're a part of. We've done some similar stories from New York this year. And then we also have had, several front page stories related to just Christians living out their faith outside the political questions about refugees. And, we had a church, a big church in Houston that just really found a way to help Ukrainian refugees kind of just, basic living types of help, as well as trying to, help them spiritually, if I could say that word, so, things like that. And then here in Oklahoma, where the Chronicle is, Audrey and I went less than a mile from our office and met with refugees from Afghanistan that have just been really taken in and embraced by Christians here. And the same thing in San Antonio. I wasn't a mile away. I had to fly there, but there's Christians there who just heard that there were thousands of people coming, having to leave their homeland, Afghanistan, and coming there to San Antonio. And they said, well, how can we help? And one couple helping just turned into something really big. And so I think about historically, we think about like the civil rights movement and, the 1960s, people will go back to the Chronicle and say, well, what were Churches of Christ doing during that time, or how did they respond? And my hope and thought would be that maybe when they're looking, how did members of Churches of Christ respond when there were thousands of people from Afghanistan or Ukraine coming to the country? Did they try to open their arms to them and welcome the foreigner, or how did they treat them? I think they'll find some or a lot of coverage in the Chronicles pages this year related to that. And Calvin, you get to go last again.
Yeah, I really don't do much of anything consequential. I just mainly write fluff and filler pieces, which is nice because that means I don't get nearly as many hate comments as Cheryl. But if I had to pick something sort of consequential, I would say it was not a story that I wrote, but it was related to a story that I wrote, which was behind the story of a movie that came out this year, On a Wing and a Prayer, about a Louisiana church member who safely landed a private plane with his family on it after the pilot died in the air.
Yeah.
And so we had some TikTok videos that went viral that were related to that story. And so usually on our social media posts, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or anywhere, we're lucky if we get 10,000 views. That those TikToks now have over 5 million views, which I think was pretty cool.